One of the interesting things about comics is that on one hand, people often say they like characters to evolve, there's growth opportunities, you're telling this ongoing story. C.B. Cebulski, when he came into Marvel, gave a big speech that I actually agreed with a lot, that comic books are unique in that you're telling this ongoing story. He didn't say soap opera, but soap opera, of lessons and journeys and different experiences and how these characters evolve and grow and change. And Marvel does a lot of this with, you have old Hawkeye and then you have new Hawkeye and he was married for a while and then he's not. And then, you have this passing of the torch, legacy, such a big thing we hear about. And at the same time, it seems like writers can't help themselves but go down the exact same story beats over and over and over. Why is that? Hey everybody, this is Perch. That was a long lead in. And every now and then I'm doing these things. By the way, I'll do another video on how I do this stuff. I won't go into that now. Anyway, um, I've been thinking about this a lot lately of comic characters and how there seems to be this disconnect between what people say they want and what people actually do. And this is probably, I think, best exemplified by Iron Man. And my example here is a lot of people look at Iron Man in the 90s as just a train wreck. And if you don't remember, Iron Man kind of went evil, and there was a kid version, and then it was a mess. I mean, if you're an Iron Man fan, it was a rough time to be to be reading that comic. And a lot of the complaints that you heard in the 2000s was that Iron Man as a character was very damaged because they tried to do too much with him. They forgot who the core of the character was. And what is the core of the character of Iron Man? Well, the storyline that is in most people's heads for Iron Man is the demon in a bottle storyline, where Iron Man was a drinker, and then he was abusing alcohol, and he was getting in his Iron Man suit, and he was flying into buildings and all kinds of things. It is funny in hindsight. You look at the shenanigans that Iron Man would get up to when he was, quote unquote, drunk and dangerous and out of control. And then you look at the page always reminds me of The Authority, where Mark Miller was writing, and there was this Avengers kind of clone team that the Authority was going into, and the Authority show up and they're drunk and they just start they fly through the head of the Giant Man character. just that's out of control. It's funny because I've gone back and I've read Demon in a Bottle, and you're like, I don't know. I mean, a lot of the current like the champions in their comic are messing things up much worse than drunk Iron Man. It puts it all in perspective. At any rate, that storyline, Demon in a Bottle, is one that all the writers seem to remember. And it's like that moment of Tony Stark's life is frozen in time. So whenever a writer comes on to do a pitch, for whatever reason, it's happened a lot lately, there's this temptation of like, hey, let's see what happens when we get him drinking again. We've got the Axis inversion of Iron Man, and he's out there in his white suit and he's drinking and he's falling off the wagon. And then we get Dan Slott's Iron Man, and he's drinking in the virtual world and getting drunk there. And Matt Fraction didn't do drinking, to be fair, but it did do this feels like an addiction. It's like they've never moved past that one storyline, that one moment. And the argument against this, I've mentioned this to Fraction years ago, was that, well, an alcoholic doesn't just, heal themselves and be done, and then life moves on. There actually is it's something that they live with for the rest of their life. And that's a valid point. But at the same time, the storyline shouldn't always reflect into this almost, titillating, is Iron Man going to get drunk? Oh, I think he is. Oh, no, he's drinking again. And now he'll have to go back they have to have that last panel where he goes back to AA and he's like, I always will remember. It's like, there's got to be more storylines for a guy that can, is a super genius, rich, entrepreneur, can build a suit that can fly into space, the middle of the earth, fight all the villains. I mean, do you really, is he's going to fall off the wagon really all you got? Why do you always go back to that? And the same thing is true with Daredevil, to some extent, is like, let's do a storyline where he's a crisis of faith because he's Catholic, and what if there wasn't a God? Let's have him wonder about that. It feels like in comics there's this simultaneous lack of ability to kind of move on past some of the character traits, alongside a deep desire to upend everything, kill people off, bring them back to life. It just feels like they're doing kind of all things at once, and in many cases, maybe the worst thing at once. I would rather have the emotional growth, the character traits change. What is the next demon in a bottle storyline? When is the next thing for these heroes to overcome? Why do we have to keep? It's like we can only have two flaws, and so we're just going to do that one. Or in some cases, we don't even want to have one flaw, so we'll just kind of start erasing it. But then there's a very casual, nature of saying, "Hey, here's a good example. When a new writer comes on Spider-Man, or when Dan Slott came on Spider-Man, or even when Nick Spencer came on Spider-Man, there is this desire. James Tynion, the fourth with Batman, when he started writing it, in the articles, in the prep to get readers ready for these comics, they would say things like, "We're introducing a brand new supporting cast. There's going to be a lot of new fresh faces. There's going to be a lot of new people." And I always think to myself, why don't you dive into God, Spider-Man's got to have like 500 people in his supporting cast over the last 60 years. You can't dig one of them up. I mean, why? They're not aging. I mean, do you think you could, find somebody from past storylines and give them something new to do? I mean, maybe, maybe Ned Leeds. Well, I mean, that's not a good example. but my point is that these characters, there's this desire to always upend things with new supporting cast, new things. Hey, we're going to move them out to San Francisco. No, we're going to move them back to Boston. Hey, why aren't any of the superheroes? They never go to Kansas City. But they want to upend these things about the characters, but then they go right back to the same stuff. I mean, even when the X-Men, they're like, we're going to move out of Westchester and we're going to head on over to San Francisco, and then we're going to be on the Magneto Island outside the Bay, and we're going to do all these things. We're going to mess up traffic real good. Even when they're doing all these things, they're still doing the same. Hey, let's have Wolverine and Cyclops be jealous of each other. Hey, let's see what happens when Scott's pining after Jean Grey, but she's dead. It's weird how they do new and old and backwards. Am I making any sense? I don't know. My point here is that I think that you look at a character like Tony Stark, and there seems to be a timidness to actually do new things with the character, while simultaneously changing and removing all the underpinnings of what makes a comic interesting in the first place. It's like, we're going to go back and do Tony Stark in the virtual world, and we're going to tempt it with alcohol, and we're going to deal with that. And but we've seen that song before. But what we haven't seen is Iron Man face a new villain, or not a new villain, but an old villain. I mean, what would Iron Man versus Ultron look like? We got that in Tony Stark's, in Dan Slott, not Tony Stark. What am I saying? I'm all confused. In Dan Slott's run, we got Tony Stark Iron Man against Ultron, but it was Hank Pym trying to, do something with his wife and get Jan there. And it's like we're going back to the same beats, even for the old villains. It's like we're still hung up on Hank Pym's toxic relationship with Janet Van Dyne, and then we've got Iron Man, and it just I don't know what I'm complaining about anymore. Hey, this is a weird video. Like, subscribe, comment. Am I making any point here, or is this just a gigantic cluster fail? Let me know in the comments below. I can take it. I never mind. And otherwise, follow me on Twitter at Comic Perch. I'll promise I'll try and be at least a little bit more coherent there. Thanks for listening.